A jet crashes into the Hudson. 155 survive, all thanks to human instinct. Another falls silent over the Atlantic. 228 lives are lost, victims of confusion as automation falters. Today, computers fly planes 90% of every journey, while pilots touch the controls for just minutes. If machines are so capable, will pilots even matter when planes truly fly themselves? The answer lies in what happens when the unimaginable strikes, and only one kind of judgment remains. 155 people stand on the wings of an Airbus A320, shivering in the January cold, minutes after their jet settles on the Hudson River. Captain Sullenberger, with nearly 20,000 hours in the cockpit, had just faced a situation no checklist could solve: a total loss of thrust at 2,800 feet, engines silenced by a flock of geese. The clock gave him 3.5 minutes. In that window, Sullenberger's choices unfolded with a kind of clarity that only decades of experience could produce. He stabilized the aircraft, weighed impossible options, and rejected the urge to turn back toward LaGuardia or Teterboro, knowing the risk of falling short over dense New York neighborhoods. Instead, he zeroed in on the Hudson, calculating glide, wind, and distance in seconds. As the city blurred past, he and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles coordinated calmly, running through emergency procedures, communicating with air traffic control, and preparing the cabin. Sullenberger guided the powerless jet past the George Washington Bridge with less than 1,000 feet to spare, touching down at 125 knots. Passengers and crew braced for impact. Every soul on board survived. NTSB would later confirm that no system or automation could have navigated those 208 seconds. It was a triumph of human judgment under pressure, a story retold in classrooms and cockpit briefings around the world. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of drama played out in the darkness above the ocean. Air France Flight 447, an Airbus A330, cruised at 35,000 feet when ice crystals blocked the pitot tubes, feeding unreliable airspeed data to the computers. In an instant, Autopilot disconnected, leaving the crew to fly manually at high altitude, an environment most pilots rarely experience outside simulators. First Officer Pierre-Cedric Bonin, with limited time flying without automation, pulled the nose up, a reaction that would prove fatal. For over 3 minutes, the stall warning blared 75 times. The aircraft bled off speed, falling through the night sky while the cockpit filled with confusion. The captain, returning from a break, found his crew locked in a struggle with unfamiliar warnings and conflicting instincts. Despite every alert, the nose stayed high, and the aircraft descended in a stalled attitude from 38,000 feet into the Atlantic. All 228 people aboard lost their lives. The investigation would reveal a cockpit paralyzed by uncertainty, where reliance on automation had eroded the manual flying skills needed in those critical moments. 2 flights, separated by months and continents, faced the unimaginable. One captain drew on a lifetime of training and intuition to save every life. Another crew, caught off guard by the sudden loss of automation, became overwhelmed by doubt and procedural gaps. The difference between survival and tragedy lay not in the aircraft or its systems, but in the humans at the controls. These stories frame aviation's central dilemma. When the unexpected happens, can machines truly replace the judgment born from experience? Commercial jets slip from the runway into the sky with barely a touch from human hands. After takeoff, pilots engage autopilot at around 100 feet, handing over control to computers that guide the aircraft across continents and oceans. From that point until final approach, sometimes hours later, automated systems manage altitude, heading, and speed with precision that rarely falters. The numbers are stark. On a typical flight, pilots manually fly for only 3 to 6 minutes, usually at the very beginning and end. For the remaining 90% of the journey, computers hold the reins. The heart of this digital choreography is the flight management system, called FMS. This onboard computer plots the most efficient route, calculates fuel needs, and constantly adjusts for weather, winds, and traffic. Once a flight plan is loaded, the FMS feeds instructions to the autopilot, which fine-tunes the aircraft's path down to the smallest degree. Meanwhile, auto-throttle systems monitor engine power, making hundreds of adjustments each hour to maintain the perfect balance between speed and efficiency, without a pilot's hand ever touching the throttle levers. Beneath the surface, fly-by-wire technology has quietly replaced the cables and pulleys of earlier generations. Introduced on the Airbus A320 in 1988, fly-by-wire translates pilot inputs into electronic signals, which computers interpret and relay to the control surfaces. This allows for smoother handling, protects against dangerous maneuvers, and can even override human error in extreme cases. In practice, it means the aircraft is always listening, ready to correct a sudden gust or a misjudged input before it becomes a problem. Automation extends to landing as well. Autoland systems can bring a jet safely to the runway in fog so thick the ground vanishes from sight, guiding the aircraft down to the pavement with little or no input from the crew. Yet despite this capability, automatic landings occur on less than 1% of flights. Regulations, weather, and airport equipment often limit their use. Takeoff, on the other hand, remains a manual task. No commercial jet in service today can launch itself into the air without a pilot at the controls. For most passengers, the extent of this invisible hand is a surprise. The hum of the engines, the steady cruise at 35,000 feet, the gentle descent, almost all are governed by algorithms and sensors. Pilots remain in the cockpit, monitoring systems, ready to take over in case the unexpected occurs. But for the vast majority of every flight, it is the computer, not the human, that keeps the airplane aloft and on course. On a clear July morning in 2013, Asiana Airlines Flight 214 approached San Francisco International Airport after a long haul from Seoul. The Boeing 777 had flown most of its journey under the steady watch of autopilot and autothrottle, systems designed to maintain altitude and speed with precision. But as the aircraft neared runway 28 left, the pilots switched off the autopilot, planning to land visually. What followed would expose a hidden danger lurking in the modern cockpit: automation complacency. The crew expected the autothrottle to maintain their target approach speed, as it had done for hours, but the autothrottle was in armed mode and not actively controlling thrust. With the automation disengaged, engine power dropped to idle. The pilots, focused on lining up with the runway and managing the descent, failed to notice their airspeed bleeding away. Neither pilot called out the rapidly dropping speed or the low approach path. The aircraft drifted well below the glide slope, descending too quickly and too slowly, just seconds from landing. Auto throttle. At 500 feet, the captain realized something was wrong. He called for more power, but the engines responded too late. The 707's tail struck the seawall at the runway's edge at just 106 knots, well below the safe landing speed. The impact tore off the tail section and sent the fuselage spinning across the tarmac. 3 passengers lost their lives, and 187 were injured in the chaos that followed. Impact. Investigators combed through cockpit recordings and flight data, piecing together a sequence shaped not by mechanical failure, but by gaps in monitoring and confusion over automation modes. The National Transportation Safety Board found that the crew's over-reliance on automated systems and their lack of awareness when those systems quietly disengaged allowed a routine approach to spiral out of control. In the end, the pilots' trust in technology dulled their vigilance at the worst possible moment, turning a routine landing into a disaster. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 lifted off from Jakarta in a brand new Boeing 737 MAX. 12 minutes later, the jet plunged into the Java Sea, killing all 189 people on board. Less than 5 months after that, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed near Addis Ababa, claiming another 157 lives. Both disasters trace back to a software system called MKS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, installed by Boeing to counter new aerodynamic quirks in the MAX. MCAS was programmed to push the nose down if it sensed the plane was climbing too steeply, relying on a single angle of attack sensor for its input. In both crashes, that lone sensor failed. MCAS activated repeatedly, forcing the nose down against the pilot's commands. Cockpit recordings show crews fighting for control, unaware that a hidden piece of software was working against them. Boeing had not included MCAS procedures in the flight manual, and most pilots flying the MAX had never even heard of it. The system could be triggered again and again, each time making it harder for the crew to recover. Internal Boeing emails later revealed the company had chosen a single sensor design to save time and money, aiming to keep the MAX competitive with Airbus's A320neo. Certification documents showed the FAA had delegated much of the safety review back to Boeing itself. When the truth came out, the consequences rippled across the industry. The entire Boeing 737 MAX fleet, over 380 jets, was grounded worldwide for nearly 20 months, the longest grounding in commercial aviation history. Airlines lost billions, passengers were stranded, and trust in both Boeing and the FAA plummeted. The MCAS crisis exposed a new kind of threat: automation that not only failed to prevent disaster, but actively fought the pilots. It raised urgent questions about how much control should be handed to software and whether regulators and manufacturers can keep pace with the systems they approve. In the end, 346 lives were lost to a chain of decisions that put opaque automation between pilots and the aircraft they were meant to fly. Human error sits at the heart of aviation's safety record. Decades of analysis by NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System and international agencies reveal a stubborn pattern. Between 70 and 80% of all aviation accidents can be traced to human factors. The numbers hold steady year after year across continents and aircraft types. Pilots, air traffic controllers, maintenance crews, each step in the chain is vulnerable to fatigue, distraction, or misjudgment. For every headline-making crash, there are thousands of close calls and minor incidents that never reach the public. In 2009, Colgan Air Flight 3407 crashed outside Buffalo, New York, killing all 50 people aboard. Investigators found both pilots were fatigued, with the captain commuting overnight before the flight and the first officer fighting off illness. Their reactions in the cockpit were slow, confused, and ultimately fatal. That crash prompted the FAA to overhaul rest requirements nationwide. The lesson was clear: even the best technology cannot compensate for a tired or distracted crew. Sometimes the danger comes from within. In 2015, Germanwings Flight 9525 was deliberately flown into a mountainside by its co-pilot, who locked the captain out of the cockpit. All 150 people on board died. The incident forced airlines to rethink cockpit access and mental health screening, but it also raised a darker question. Could automation prevent the rare catastrophic acts of human malice? Yet for every case where humans are the weak link, pilots' unions like the Airline Pilots Association, ALPA, point to the other side of the ledger. ALPA argues that pilots prevent disaster in 99.99% of system malfunctions. Their claim is built on millions of incident reports, where pilots catch problems before they escalate, recognizing a faulty sensor, troubleshooting a glitch, or overriding a misbehaving autopilot. The data is clear. Most aviation accidents involve people, but so do nearly all of its saves. The debate over trust in automation is not just about replacing error-prone humans. It is about weighing the risks we know against the ones we do not. That is the central question. Do we trust machines more than human judgment when the unimaginable happens? Jet cockpits once bustled with 5 crew members: a captain, first officer, flight engineer, radio operator, and navigator. As radio technology improved, the dedicated operator faded from the flight deck. Inertial navigation systems, introduced in the 1960s, made the navigator unnecessary. The Boeing 727 launched in 1967 with 3 crew, keeping the flight engineer but dropping the rest. For decades, unions fought to preserve these jobs, arguing that safety depended on numbers. Yet, by 1982, The Boeing 767 became the first wide-body certified for just 2 pilots. United Airlines resisted, insisting on a 3-person crew for their early 767s, while Ansett Australia held out until 1998. The last 3 crew 727s retired from passenger service in 2013, closing an era that had lasted more than half a century. Each reduction came only after years of data and debate. Meanwhile, the military was proving a different concept. In 1995, the Predator drone carried out surveillance missions over the Balkans, flown by operators sitting thousands of miles away. By the early 2000s, MQ-1 Predators and MQ-9 Reapers flew armed missions and long-endurance patrols, logging millions of hours with no one on board. These advances showed that remote and even fully autonomous flight was not just possible, but reliable, reshaping what the industry considered normal. Boeing's latest forecast calls for 660,000 new pilots by 2044, a number that has airlines and flight schools scrambling. The economics are daunting. Training for a commercial cockpit costs more than $100,000, often leaving new pilots with heavy debt and starting salaries below $30,000 a year. Regional carriers, the traditional first step for aspiring aviators, struggle to fill rosters as pay lags behind the investment required. The COVID-19 pandemic only made things worse. Early retirement swept out thousands of experienced pilots almost overnight, and many never returned. Airlines responded by cutting routes and reducing schedules, especially in smaller markets where staffing shortfalls hit hardest. Flight schools are packed, but the pipeline cannot keep up with demand. For many would-be pilots, the financial math does not add up. High costs, low pay, and years before reaching a major airline. The industry faces a crossroads: raise wages and absorb higher costs, or lean harder on automation to fill the gap. The pressure to find a solution is growing with every unstaffed flight and canceled route. Inside a hangar on the outskirts of Toulouse, engineers gather around an Airbus A350 known as DragonFly. This test aircraft does not just fly. It can spot and recognize runways on its own, using computer vision to guide itself through complex approaches. During recent demonstrations, DragonFly's onboard system scanned the horizon, identified the correct runway, and executed a fully automated landing, all while tracking obstacles and changing weather in real time. Pilots remained in the cockpit, but the aircraft made its own decisions, watched closely by teams on the ground. The path forward is not about removing the pilot entirely, at least not yet. Airbus and other manufacturers are exploring single-pilot operations, where one crew member stays at the controls while a network of ground-based operators stands ready to assist. Cameras and biometric sensors monitor pilot alertness and health, while backup systems on the ground can step in if needed. In these experiments, the pilot's role shifts from hands-on flying to system oversight, managing automation and responding if the unexpected happens. The technology is advancing quickly, but regulations move with caution. Every new feature, from runway recognition to remote support, faces years of safety testing and certification. For now, these trials offer a glimpse of what is possible, a future where pilots do not disappear, but adapt, working alongside machines that are ready to fly themselves when called upon. Today, technology could fly an airliner from runway to runway, yet 83% of passengers still refuse to board without a human pilot. As automation accelerates and pilot shortages deepen, trust, not just software, will decide who commands the cockpit. The future of flight won't just be about what machines can do, but what we are willing to let them decide. What would it take for you to trust a pilotless plane?